and the old Lyrians who, later on, had to return to our space-time configuration partly for exploration purposes and partly as a method of escape. Consequently, they arrived on Earth and became active in the well-known things I have already mentioned. Up to this point, this lineage retained all knowledge of their earliest origins, and from these earliest origins evolved the Pleiadians, or rather the Pleiadians. In their own language they called themselves by the identical name as their star cluster beyond the Pleiades, which is located in another space-time configuration and also deviates from our space-time configuration by a fraction of a second. After breaking away from Enoch's ancient tribes approximately 12 billion years ago, the second lineage ventured on a totally different route than that of the Lyrian group, if they may be called that. They, too, emigrated into other galaxies. But a mere 7 billion years ago, knowledge of their true, your ancestry, your equals most ancient origin, primeval, was lost. Today they have absolutely no knowledge of their true heritage. Hence, their chroniclers, historians and others created a different legend about their heritage that had nothing, or very little, in common with their true background any longer. This lineage consisted also of many diverse races in the same manner as the Lyrian lineage. However, in contrast to the Lyrians, who remained ready to fight at any time and steadily evolved toward an equilibrium from which emerged the peace-loving, well-balanced, highly developed Pleiadians, the second lineage reached that state far too quickly. Consequently, they completely lost their capability to fight and were increasingly defenseless against aggressors. As a result, they joined an extensive emigration of all peoples and landed in the region of the Sirius constellation. Once again they lost all knowledge of their past and their heritage. Again a new history of their ancestry was assembled and registered into the annals. This lineage spread through the Sirius region's farthest reaches and continuously evolved to the point where they were capable of creating new life. Having lost the ability to fight, these people bred new human races and manipulated their genes so these new races would be able to fight and protect them from repeated attacks by aggressors. Through invasive genetic manipulations, these new human races were turned into life forms who bore barbaric traits that tended toward degeneration and cruelty, and their lifespan was limited to approximately 100 years. Their genes were manipulated and tampered with because the creators and overlords feared the beings would band together and annihilate them. Eventually, their fears became reality, and for this reason new methods had to be found to bring the genetically manipulated races under their control once again, although it meant that these goals would have to be achieved through radical extermination. Since the creator overlords were more powerful than the genetically manipulated individuals, those found but one recourse, and that was to flee, which they did with help from benevolent supporters in the Sirius regions. At the same time, these supporters secretly decided to exploit the genetically manipulated people for their own use. Two large, genetically manipulated peoples fled from the Sirius regions and settled in an area on the other side of the sun. This meant they landed within, and then inhabited, a very distant part of a remote solar system, indeed, on planets beyond the galaxy's central sun, the sun of the Milky Way. Eventually, however, they were discovered by space travelers from the old Lyrian lineage, whereupon they emigrated into the Lyra regions. Ultimately, within more recent terrestrial history, they came to our planet, where they settled in China, Japan and other locations, and various new, so-called races formed. Upon leaving the Sirius regions, the other genetically manipulated peoples found a way to the Sol system, where several thousands of rebellious genetically manipulated people had previously been banished to a myriad of terrestrial locations as a punishment. These masses of diverse races found refuge on the planets Mars and Malona/Phaeton, respectively, where they constructed cities, pyramids, stations and other things. They led a good life on Mars until the planet became uninhabitable through cosmic influences. For this reason, the genetically manipulated people had to leave the planet in ancient times and, subsequently, they settled on Earth. Over the course of time, They became terrestrial human beings whose true and genuine origin was within the regions and planets of Sirius. Only the pyramids and gigantic monuments on Mars were left behind, abandoned, but stations remained operative for a long time even though all life on the planet had perished. One day all of this will be discovered by terrestrials, the genetically manipulated people, and some of these sites will even be used once again. Malona, or rather Phaeton, was destroyed in fratricidal wars by its genetically manipulated inhabitants who had originally come from the Sirius regions, and who blew up the planet by diverting parts of an ocean into the subterranean or underwater magma chambers of a gigantic volcano. The Sol System's asteroid belt contains fragments of this former planet, whose orbit was not where the asteroid belt is today but was located where Mars orbits the Sun today, and Mars at one time was located where the asteroid belt is today. This position reversal was caused by immense upheavals in which the destroyer planet played an important role. The planetary locations of Mars, Earth and Malona/Phaeton, and solar systems on the other side of our galaxy in the Milky Way, where the two yellow races settled down, were selected as effective hideouts by these races' benefactors who were the conspirators for the escape of the genetically manipulated people. Throughout the past, the refugees' hideout locations were kept secret from the creator overlords, in fear that once the overlords determined the refugees' location, they would send out punitive expeditions to eliminate the fugitives. This danger remains in existence even today and, consequently, the Americans were extremely careless in sending into space probes revealing data on the Earth's location and descriptions of human beings. If, by chance, this information should fall into the hands of the creator overlords, they would learn that the genetically manipulated people, the terrestrials, somehow had survived and greatly multiplied over these past millions of years, and one would have to assume that attacks upon Earth and its inhabitants would be launched from the Sirius regions. Such actions would result in the terrestrials' total elimination. The benefactors would not rush to aid the terrestrials, for they have withdrawn from our region long ago, shortly after their ventures to Earth. In fact, when they began fearing the genetically manipulated people, the terrestrials, in much the same way that creator overlords did formerly. This fear, which also gripped the benefactors, led to the eradication of the Earth people's ancestral records by way of various manipulations. At this time, the benefactors elevated themselves to gods and exalted themselves above the terrestrial population, who rapidly became their vassals and believers. Truthfully, in doing so, the benefactors very soon became the antithesis of benefactors. On one hand, they hoped to make the genetically manipulated people their subjects, and that, on the other, many cults, religions, fratricide, family feuds and wars would be launched through this worship of gods, whereby the terrestrials, the genetically manipulated people, would decimate and exterminate themselves. As a consequence, the gods, respectively former benefactors, hoped they would be free from the danger of the aggressive, barbaric terrestrial human life form. This plan went completely awry, however, because terrestrial man, who had become increasingly stronger, smarter, more barbarian and underhanded, began to enjoy his role and defended it to the last drop of blood with every conceivable means, ancient and modern. Consequently, the genetically manipulated population, now the inhabitants of Earth, totally slipped from the control of their former benefactors, respectively the gods, who, in turn, withdrew from the terrestrial human beings and from Earth, but not before swearing revenge and demanding satisfaction in the future from the human population on Earth. For the old Lyrians, the benefactors' withdrawal paved their way to Earth and its human beings, and as they ventured to Earth on expeditions and in flight after leaving their space and time configuration, they entered our space-time configuration in the Sol System. After a while they, too, comported themselves as gods and began causing havoc. The former benefactors of the genetically manipulated population had no idea then, nor do they now, that these developments took place, nor do they know about the existence of the Pleiadians, respectively the Pleiadians. The terrestrial, genetically manipulated human beings, however, disobeyed the Lyrians and Pleiadian/Pleiadian gods as well, although some of these gods attempted to force the terrestrials, such as the Jizay intelligences, Ashtasharan and the like, under their yoke and domination using every conceivable means possible. The former benefactors divided into two groups also. One group included those individuals who had sworn vengeance against the terrestrials and later changed their minds, while the other group remained benevolent towards the terrestrials and hoped to one day return to Earth. These gods, alone from either group, know what the future holds in store for us. Should they really return one day, terrestrials cannot expect that anything good will come from those who changed from being benefactors to malevolent personages, for, despite their change into evil-mindedness, they were unable to return to their Ur habitat in the Sirius regions. Due to their treason they were shunned as outcasts, and now they, too, must take great care to not divulge their whereabouts to the former, creator overlords, or they may also become victims of their overlords' curse for revenge. Despite their departure from Earth and the Sol system, these former benefactors, who had become addicted to their passion for revenge, nevertheless continued to maintain some contacts with Earth beings, and occasionally they even visit here. During their contacts and visits they maliciously and falsely influence terrestrial individuals with erroneous messages, visions and similar things, in much the same way the dark elements among the old Lyrians had done previously. These are only occasional intrigues, however, which only occur, as a rule, in cult-like religious sectarian form and are of very little significance, for they usually only affect the Christian religions and not all terrestrial religions. Since their alienation, the two groups, consisting of the former and the current benefactors, have had no contact whatsoever with each other. Indeed, it is very likely that such mutual contacts were strictly forbidden and knowledge of the other group's existence was erased from memory, as Quetzal once assured me, according a secret Pleiadian clarification. Some rather astonishing things are revealed when the genetic manipulations performed by the Sirius region, creator overlords, on specific human beings that generated masses of fighters are scrutinized by way of their evolution. The creator overlords themselves had lost all their capabilities to fight. Their evolution was directed only toward opulence, knowledge, competence and so forth, while their own strength and capability to fight were completely eradicated. Not only did they lose the stamina to fight but the capacity as well. When aggressors approached and threatened to annihilate these highly developed peoples, they had to find a solution to defend themselves against the attackers. To achieve this goal, they begot human beings into whom they implanted, through genetic manipulation, various forms of fighting capabilities along with an aging process factor as a precaution, whereby the genetically altered people would soon become very old and die prematurely. Such actions prevented the genetically manipulated individuals from banding together and rising up against the creator overlords. This precaution soon proved to hold true, for the genetically altered people continuously increased in numbers, and they inherited their manipulated genes, for all times. Due to the ever-increasing numbers of these genetically altered individuals, and their escalating aggressiveness toward the creator overlords, these fighters became a growing threat. For this reason, alternate ways of eliminating them were required by the overlords. However, prior to the selection of the most appropriate methods, most of the genetically altered people were able to flee and, with the help of the benefactors, they found a secure place, as I have already explained. The genetically manipulated people have since established themselves on Earth to the degree where they simultaneously became this planet's rulers and its destroyers, because most of them remained overly entangled in the effects of the manipulated genes of fighting, viciousness, barbarism, bloodthistiness, greediness, addiction, emotionalism, inhumanities, to name but a few. These characteristics have been an evil legacy for mankind from early times, and they also may actually be called the original sin. Information regarding the original sin was erroneously handed down by Christian religions as the faith